March is Endometriosis Awareness Month, which is why we are all here. I see Doris is wearing yellow, which is the color of endometriosis, but it's something that I myself had no clue about until, I entered OBGYN spaces, to be honest. I really didn't know what endo was. And I didn't know that March had, it had its own month, which is March, until, I started being in this space as part of the Black OBGYN project. Statistics say that endo affects 1 in 10 women and girls of reproductive age or reproducing people around the world. And we have an idea now how endo is treated, but Nenji and Alana, you're listening to these doctors give this amazing explanation. Everyone, I see some comments in the chat, people asking questions as well. And I encourage you to continue asking questions in the chat as because we'll get to them later on. But Nenji, I want to hear what was your story? How did you get your diagnosis? Because Dr. Debessai talked about how people present. And then we heard Dr. Vilasagar talk about how to get rid of it in a way, even though there's no cure. But how did you learn about your diagnosis?
So yeah, my journey with endo. So I've been an endo patient and advocate for about 7 years now. And my journey with endo, thank you to both of the doctors. Your explanations were so spot on, and I wish you'd been my doctors at the beginning of my journey, because I think I had a lot of the symptoms that were named, right? And so back in about 2014, my periods had gotten really, really bad, debilitating almost. I ended up in the ER 2 times. I was just on the ground and I couldn't get up. Like nothing would stop the pain, right? We're talking about everything you do, like over the counter, laying in a hot tub, heating pad, everything. It's just like someone was stabbing me and it just would not stop. Really, really scary. It just felt like, okay, I can't live through this, right? And so I had some really great family members who rushed me to the ER, which was the first time I ended up getting an ultrasound. And on that ultrasound, they found 2 tiny fibroids. And so it was just then assumed like, oh, the fibroids must be causing her pain. So then I went to go see an OBGYN and I saw probably about 4 or 5, and they, everyone would put me on like a birth control, hormonal birth control that was pretty strong because what was initially given to me didn't work. And I was like, this isn't changing anything. I'm bleeding for 21 days, 28 days in the month, and I'm in so much pain. And then eventually it took about 8, almost actually 10 months. And they finally were like, okay, well, it just still must be the fibroids. We'll just go in and do a really invasive surgery to remove the fibroids. And looking back at it, it wasn't the fibroids because there were 2 little ones that were like maybe 2 centimeters. So they weren't that big. Again, I know positions of fibroids can cause discomfort. I don't want to negate some of the symptoms that may have also been showing up from that. But in reality, the pain wasn't connected to that. And only one nurse practitioner that I saw in those whole 10 months actually said, that pain doesn't sound like fibroids. Have you heard of endo? And I was like, I don't know what it is, right? But then I looked it up and a lot of people were like, oh, mainly white women have that. It's probably just fibroids because Black women have fibroids and that's just what it is. So I went under the knife for a really invasive surgery, a myomectomy, which is where you go to remove fibroids, not even a laparoscopic one, which was really huge as a 26-year-old at the time. And just like, why am I going under such a big surgery? But again, I didn't know, right? I had no sense of how to advocate and what was going on. And so when they went in there, they found out I had stage 3 endometriosis and my entire right fallopian tubes and ovaries don't work. Like everything was so clogged and my organs were all stuck in all the different wrong places. And so they did the best they could to unstick that. But because they weren't coming in, the purpose of the surgery wasn't for that. They removed the 2 little fibroids, but they didn't actually do an excision surgery. Like the surgeon at the time didn't know how to do that. I hadn't consented, all those things. So yeah, that's how my diagnosis came. It's a pretty passionate story because there was just so much pain involved. And again, going under the knife for something that wasn't it, but I did get an answer to the pain. And since then, it's been a lot of managing symptoms, and you may get to a question on that as well, so I won't jump into that. But that was my diagnosis story, was literally going under the knife for something else. But then they're like, oh, but nobody had thought that, nobody had really listened to the pain aspect, which was the main symptom, right? Like for me, I was like, I'll deal with the bleeding, I don't care. But I can't live in this type of pain. And it was just assumed it was the fibroids because that's what you could see on an ultrasound. Because as both of you have said, you can't see endometriosis on an ultrasound. So, but when they went in there, they figured out that that's what it was. And then we began taking treatment steps after that. So, yeah.
Wow. I'm just watching, all of our heads are just bobbing up and down because we're like, you hit so many things that we're going to get to. The, you know, number one, this myth that Black women don't get endo, which is not true. You know, number two, this not being heard when you're in pain, and, you know, going in. Number three, for something very invasive, major surgery, and, you know, not really having good direction in the beginning of to know even what this disease is. You know, Alana, I know your story is a little bit different because you were diagnosed with endometriosis more recently. So I'm curious, how did you learn what endometriosis even was? And how have you gone on to manage it? It sounds like Nenji's managing it mostly just kind of post-surgery, you know, and kind of symptom-wise, but how are you living with endometriosis?
So I was diagnosed in September of 2019. I've always had heavy periods and also painful periods, but it was about 3 years ago where that shifted, and it was excruciating. Like I said, just sorry, I was reading a comment and a word popped out at me. It was just like needles just clawing at your uterus, and I knew something was wrong. As I've said, I'm in the Navy, and I was on a ship leading a department, and so having a painful, debilitating period every month, though it's not something we should sit in general and accept, I just couldn't hack that on the ship and still perform my duties. So I went, scheduled an appointment, told the gynecologist that I was having this pain and that it had changed from what it was before. And we went with, well, we'll just take Depo. So I kind of just wanted my period to stop, threw a Band-Aid at it so I could continue to hustle and do my job on the ship. And it caught up with me. Ooh, it caught up with me. It was literally the day before my birthday in 2019. I had a pain flare that I've never experienced before. And I have experienced, they've gotten worse through that time, but not knowing what was going on, but I was still being stubborn. I said, you know, I just feel like I ate bad food. That's kind of how it came on, like stomach issues. And I felt like I had to go to the bathroom, and then it exploded. And so I had a friend take me to the ER the next morning, and I thought my appendix had burst. It was just excruciating. And so that's why I ended up going. I was like, I really need to go take care of this. And they thought the same thing. So I went to the emergency room, they did a CAT scan. And the doctor came back and was like, well, you have a 10-centimeter size cyst. It was to the point that it was wrapping around the back of my uterus. And so I actually, in 2006, I had a 9-centimeter size cyst identified when I was in my freshman year at the Naval Academy. And my roommate, Laura, is actually here listening. She helped me recover and get through all of that. So it was kind of familiar territory. And I'm like, oh, well, here we go again. Another cyst. It was a good run of years before this has presented itself again. And so it's another cyst. Let me go through the surgery and bounce back like I did before. And so we scheduled surgery laparoscopic at Balboa Medical Center here in San Diego. And when I came out, the pathology came back, and my doctor, he's a gynecologist, oncologist, my surgeon, and he goes, it was endometrioma. He's like, you have endometriosis. I was like, okay, I didn't really know what that meant. My mind was really in getting back to the ship, getting back to my duties, which I have so much perspective on that now, that your health truly does come first. And so I remember asking a question, hey, is there a possibility of this coming back? And he said, you know, there's a possibility. And fast forward 5 months later, I was out on deployment in the Pacific Ocean, and the pain onset again. I pretty much had been in pain, it felt like, since surgery, but I was kind of managing it. And then I had to go to the emergency room in Yokosuka, Japan, and they did an ultrasound. And, you know, kind of in your internal ultrasounds, they're just taking a little too long to do what they're doing, really kind of searching around for things. And I looked at her and I said, I know something's up. And so another doctor came in. During that, they were looking at it. I had cysts, I had the endometriomas growing back, I had fibroids. Fast forward to actually March 1st of this past March 1st, I had my second surgery. I was fighting to go through fertility treatments this whole time. That's why I was delayed. So it was literally March to March. I left my ship in March last year. Came back, had surgery, was able to go through a fertility cycle, get a couple eggs, which was a blessing because my numbers were low and they've told me for months they didn't recommend that I do the cycle. And here we are. Sorry if that was long, but that was my journey. And now I have much more of an appreciation for what it is and how important it is that I need to be deeply involved in my wellness with this.
Absolutely. Wow. For the both of you, I just want to say thank you. And I saw a couple comments in the chat also expressing this, but first, appreciation for you sharing your stories. They're so different, both of them, but yet they are so touching and they're so real. They help put a face to a chronic illness, a disease, you know. I think one thing I heard in both of your stories was this sense of almost isolation at the beginning of your diagnosis. You know, someone's telling you you have an endometrioma, you know, chocolate cyst, or someone saying, oh, you might have fibroids, and going in and telling you, oh, you have endometriosis. Neither of you knew what that was. And I'm so glad on this panel, we also have some advocates and organizations. And so I'm curious for the organizations, when you are hearing these stories from Alana and Nenji, and you're hearing the definition from the doctors, you know, how are you trying to bridge the education gap, really? You know, first, Doris, why don't I have you kind of tell us about your organization, and then like what you are trying to do to help people like Alana, Nenji, maybe some of the people in our audience who don't know they have endo, learn or know what endo is before they get the diagnosis.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm also an endo warrior myself. It took me 30 years to get my diagnosis. So that's actually the reason why I started Endo Sisters East Africa Foundation. So the organization is based in Kenya, and it's a social advocacy organization. And we focus really on two things, two areas rather. One is community awareness activities, and that's like education, exactly what you're saying. We focus primarily on adolescents. We really target because we know it's, you know, talking about endo early is important because it helps in mitigating and managing the disease better. So we talk to students, I mean, to, you know, those in school. We talk to college girls, you know, those in college and university and youth groups and all that. And then the other thing we also do is a lot of social media. We do a lot of TV interviews and speaking engagements. You know, we're involved in those sort of discussions just to get the word out there. We also have a campaign running known as the Yellow Nails, #YellowNails movement. So we, you know, we paint our nails yellow, and it's just sort of exciting and making it interesting for young girls to want to come out and identify and learn more about it. And even the ones who are diagnosed at that time, it's something positive to kind of relate to, you know, and to kind of want to be associated with. So we started that as a fun thing, and it's actually, you know, many women, especially here during endo month, you know, will paint their nails yellow. The other thing that we do is we focus on advancing social justice for women. And so but by doing that, some of the initiatives that we've done, for example, is we've managed to have menstrual education, menstrual disorders education included in our school curriculum. I mean, that is like huge because, you know, many of us, you know, even listening to the stories, people hadn't had of endometriosis before. So, so we just had it put in, and so yeah, it's going to start from grade 6, and the kids will be taught about menstrual disorders. I mean, they'll get to learn about the different, you know, endometriosis, fibroids, adenomyosis, you know, everything, so that they then have some understanding and they're able to identify the symptoms that they're having. The other thing under social justice that we're doing is books. It's just we have a book that's out called When Something Is Wrong. Actually, that's just getting launched tomorrow. But we also have yes, it's yeah, and then we also have another free booklet on our website that's on demystifying endometriosis. And those are, you know, the whole issue of that it's a Caucasian disease, you know, that kind of thing. We, you know, we demystify, we debunk those kind of myths. And then we also have a guide for, you know, for those people, because we can't manage to, you know, to do the outreach training to everybody. So what we do is train some people and then get them to go and talk to other communities in far off places, and especially the countries, neighboring countries where we can't really get to. Yeah, so that's pretty much what we do. Oh, and I shouldn't forget to say that one of the other initiatives that we've done is collaborated with our obstetrics and gynecology society, and we've gotten an opportunity to appear at one of their meetings and actually talk about the human face of endometriosis. So we have made, you know, we've spoken to them and told them, let them see how we feel, and let them see us rather not as patient number 19 or patient number 2 or 4, but as daughters, sisters, mothers, you know, wives, and just, you know, tell our story, and also say what we expect, the kind of treatment we would want, the kind of advice, you know, the kind of holistic, as Dr. Smitha mentioned, that it's, you know, it's a systemic disease. So, you know, that holistic sort of approach in terms of treatment. Yeah, and also the guidance to and direction towards support groups, because we have a number of support groups existing. So, you know, yeah, thank you.
Well, Filling Empty Wounds came about, of course, because of my own story, my endometriosis story. I was the one that I started my menstrual at 9 years old, and I haven't even had the talk with my parents about menstrual yet. And here comes this blood that just won't stop. So now, as I'm getting older, I can never remember when I had a menstrual that wasn't painful. The only time I can remember is when a doctor put me on birth control. But what drove me to start Filling Empty Wounds was the fact that growing up with endometriosis, not knowing that's what I had, because it didn't make sense. No one around me had it. I was the only one. My mom didn't have it. I don't have any sisters, but I don't have any cousins, also distant family that had it. But my mom knew I was not lying, that something was wrong with her daughter. Every month I had a day or two, sometimes 3, of me throwing up, me having bowel movement, having issues just to stand up because I was so weak. I passed out before. It was pain. And at that time, I didn't have children, but I'm like, this has to feel like labor pains. This has to feel like labor. It didn't make any sense. So now, every month we was going to the ER, going to the doctor to have it checked, and every single one of them would tell my parents, she's lying. There's nothing wrong with her. She's asking for attention, and she's just making it up. And I'm like, I don't understand. I am in pain because if I'm in school, I call out of school. I have to make arrangements with my workers as I get older. It's like, listen, I'm gonna need you as a backup for me because this is the time I'm supposed to have my menstrual, because I know I am a liability to whatever company I'm working for because the pain is so bad. I can't stand up enough to work for you, yet alone to take care of myself. So from there is because the lies that everybody was telling me, oh, she's lying, there's nothing wrong with her, that impact the drive of Filling Empty Wounds, because it took 21 years for me to be diagnosed with endometriosis. And when I was officially diagnosed, it was because of mistake. My husband and I, we were high school sweetheart, we got married, and we wanted to have children right away. Right away, we wanted to have a honeymoon baby, and it wasn't working. A year into it, my doctor decided, okay, we've been doing this for a year now, let's start Clomid. So we did my first month of Clomid, and I was getting pain. And I called, am I supposed to have pain taking Clomid? She's like, no, you're not supposed to. So I'm like, okay. She said, let's wait for another month to see what happened. So we waited another month, and the pain this time was even worse. So she brought me in, did an ultrasound. I had a cyst on both sides, on both of my ovaries. She said, wait a month, let's see if it goes down. Well, the right side got bigger. So that's when we decide to have surgery to check at those cysts or remove. Well, that cyst was actually a grapefruit size of a chocolate cyst. And at any point it could have burst, but it was just sitting there. And years prior, I didn't know that was a correlation. I've had bad constipation. I've had colonics done and nothing would relieve my constipation. And that was because that cyst was literally sitting on my colon. So we had the surgery, came out of it, find out I had stage 4 endometriosis. All those years, it was just collecting. Find out months later, I'm like, well, now that we got that done, can we have children? Went to get an HSG done. And both of my, well, she removed my right tube because it was crippled as if you crippled paper. And my left tube was left and nothing was going through. It was completely blocked. So now I'm in the doctor's office and hearing that the only way I have children was through IVF. So I had so much mixed emotion because I'm like, if only the doctors listened to me way back when, or if they did something, or just give me an extra 15 to explain everything, I would not have to go through infertility. So because of that, I empower women to advocate for themselves, learn about whatever you are going through and fight for them to listen to you. I was younger, so fighting for my issue went as far as my parents, but my parents wasn't knowledgeable about this as well. And I'm Haitian, my parents are from the Caribbean. This is foreign to them. So I can't even blame them for something they didn't know. But now providing women that you don't have to go to the extent that I had to go through in order to be heard by your doctor, in order to advocate for yourself. Because yes, infertility is not the end result, but if we could avoid it by getting diagnosed early on with endo or other PCOS, fibroids, whatever it is, if we can get diagnosed early on, maybe you won't have to go through a route of infertility, especially here in the States. It is expensive. And especially women of color, if you don't have that disposable income, we can't afford it. We can't afford to get out of work to go to multiple doctor's appointment. We can't afford to expend our families due to the lack of funds and the lack of knowledge. So that's the reason why I created Filling Empty Wounds, because our goal is at some point we're starting to become a nonprofit. By the end of the year, we'll officially be a nonprofit organization. And we want to fund, that's our main goal. We want to fund families to expand their family, either through adoption or going through infertility treatment. And we are giving people the tools they need to provide that service to themselves or to others. We're starting the process to launch an ambassador program that these women, what I hear all the time is that no one understand, no one are around me, no one, I can't explain this to anybody because I'm being shamed. I feel it's taboo. So I've created an ambassador program where we train these women, like we're gonna teach you how to advocate for yourself, and you're gonna go out and help others in the journey to advocate for themselves. But the main part is to create that sisterly bond, to let them know they're not alone, because we don't have to be, because there are millions of us that's going through it. We just go through it silently, and we don't have to. And I tell people, cancer wasn't something that everybody talked about years ago. But because more people came out and told their story, now cancer is nationally recognized. Someone will stop to hear someone that explains their cancer to someone else, not so much endometriosis, not so much infertility. So to remove that stigma, we have to feel empowered to speak about it, regardless of how other people may perceive us. So that's one of our agendas for Filling Empty Room, to advocate, teach you how to advocate for you, and then to go along to help other people advocate for themselves.
But, you know, for the patients on the panel, you know, specifically Alana and Nenji, you know, what do you wish you had known earlier or sooner or younger or pre-diagnosis about endometriosis, you know?
I wish I would have known how much it would change my life, but also how much it would affect me mentally and emotionally. I didn't say it before, but I was diagnosed in this past surgery with stage 4 endometriosis. And so the doctor came out of surgery. This is not a knock on his bedside manner, because I'm a very direct person. So I wanted to give it to me straight. But the first thing he said to me was, "It's a disaster in there." And I said, "Oh, wow." I wish in that initial diagnosis, I would have asked more questions. I would have taken it seriously. I would have paused for my health, would have taken that pause in my career for my health, and would have done the work that I'm doing now then. And maybe I could have prevented a stage 4 diagnosis. Maybe I could have saved myself some of the pain I felt since then. I just wish I would ask more questions, and even rewind back to 2006 in my first surgery. I wish I would have taken that health issue a little bit more seriously, because then I probably would have pushed to do some fertility, some freezing of some eggs a lot sooner than when I am now in extremis with all these surgeries. So I wish I would have just taken it a little bit more seriously, asked more questions, and educated myself more.
Yeah, I think for me, I feel like it's sort of, some of it's already been said, but I think, I just think the education piece, I think even pre-diagnosis, getting to the point where I was in like this stabbing pain that I couldn't stand up and I couldn't move, I wish I had known more, had more awareness about, I think, sort of what Doris is saying, in the sense of like, some of the atypical, some of the symptoms of endometriosis in essence, right? And truly know that like huge blood clots are not, like consistently are not normal, because I became anemic as a result of it as well. And just think, again, the debilitating way, I shouldn't have been vomiting, right? I shouldn't have felt like I was fainting. And so I wish had just been a greater awareness of symptoms even prior. So, I was suffering through my teens pretty silently, but just like, oh, I'm strong, I take pain, I just keep moving, right? I'm an educator, I run schools, I do all these things. And I wish someone had told me. I wish there was conversation in spaces around me. I wish even in my own family, personal circles, professional circles, that people were more comfortable sharing about their reproductive health. And I think the more I've even shared with other people, they've been like, oh, you know what, this is, again, I think it's the point people said like, oh, I have that symptom too. And I've been wondering, and I've just, and I think I just wish there had been more education around me, and that I had known, because I definitely would have sought to begin advocating even sooner before getting to a place where it just, the pain literally is unbearable. And you think, wow, I could actually die from this because I can't, this is just so unbearable. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the key things. And then I also wish I had known and understood sooner what a lot of you all have said, that it's okay to change doctors. It's okay to advocate for yourself and to really say, hey, this isn't working for me, or like, I'm not being taken seriously here. Let me keep pushing, and really being transparent with my pain, and hoping that somebody will listen sooner and actually really take into account all of my symptoms. So definitely the self-advocacy, but then even just the knowledge around, what isn't typical, and why, suffering sort of in silence. And last thing I will say on that, because it's been mentioned a little bit, is just that there's no shame in it, right? Like I think there's such a stigma. And so often, if I were to think about someone who just got diagnosed, like, don't feel ashamed, like, don't feel like you're to blame. Don't feel like you've done something wrong and it's your fault. I think I think a lot of the silence is because there's shame, and there's the sense of like, someone's like, oh, you have an illness, what did you do? Like, especially again, talking about people of color and Black women, it's like, oh, people think, oh, is it genetics, or oh, is it you don't eat well, or, whatever it is. There's so many things people come up with and say. And I just think, yeah, I just wish sooner. I mean, fortunately, I'm a pretty strong advocate overall, but I think in the initial year or two, it was like, oh gosh, I'm ashamed. Did I do something wrong? My body's broken. I just wish I'd known sooner too, and that our young girls and young menstruators knew sooner that there is no shame, and you're not to blame, and you're not alone in this reality and in this experience. That there's a community of people out there in solidarity with you, and who you can lean on through the journey. So.
For Doris and Sandra, a little bit, almost similar, but a little bit different, as two survivors of endometriosis, now with an organization, how can people support your endo space, number one, very briefly, and then, for kind of going into some of these audience questions, how can organizations make themselves more available for women and people who think they have endometriosis?
Okay, I can go first. For us, well, supporting the organization in terms of, first of all, to move on even with our work, I mean, one of the most difficult things is actually just getting funding for the organization, because really nobody is funding this kind of work. We have an MHM policy in Kenya, but the focus of MHM is really more on sanitary products, facilitation and services and all that, but not on the aspects of menstrual disorders and endometriosis and, you know, issues like that. So it's become very difficult because most funders are not giving money for that. So that's been a real big challenge, which of course has impacted in terms of how we can support even the members, even the you know, the ladies who look up to us to help them and to, you know, who seek support, especially for medical care and that kind of issue. So yeah, so that's I think for me the appeal would be to the funders and to the policymakers out there to see that the narrative has changed, that MHM, especially in the wider space, because MHM is a big thing now, you know, the menstrual hygiene management issues. And there's a lot of money that's coming in for the sanitary pads and all that and the products. And I think it's time they start thinking about including menstrual, you know, issues to do with menstrual wellness, menstrual health, menstrual disorders education, so that then once they start funding that, once they start including that, then money would be available for the rest of us in terms of helping us to achieve the work that we're doing.
Half of this incredible discussion, you know, how can any of the people listening right now, so those that, you know, might have insurance, might not have insurance, that are frustrated because of their pain or think that they're about to be diagnosed with endometriosis, how can they find support? You know, what would you recommend for them? And, you know, in addition, just how can we support your organization, which is Filling Empty Wounds?
One of the things I tell everyone is that own your story. Own your story. It may not be beautiful, it may have a lot of scars in it, but it's your story. Own it and keep saying it until someone's listening to you. And I couldn't guarantee eventually you're going to find someone that's just like you, someone that's going through it, and now you giving them permission to also tell their story. So own it regardless of how it looks, and tell your story in the midst of your tears. It doesn't matter. It needs to be told. So advocating, educating is something that I'm heavily about, because I wish I knew more when I started this. And I don't want someone else having to wait 20 some odd years, 30 some odd years when they're ready to have children and find out I have endometriosis. And it got to the point I stopped mentioning that I had endometriosis to doctors, because it was like, what's the point? You're not going to listen to me. Like, what's the point of me rehashing the story for nothing? Because nothing's going to come out of it. So now I tell them, keep sharing, keep telling your doctor. And if you can't find one, find someone else who listen. So one of the things that we have under our umbrella is the acronym SAVE, which is the acronym Support, Awareness, Financial, and Education. This is something that we have to give to our community, because we don't want another little Black girl having to go through this and being told, oh, you just don't want to go to work because you're in pain. You're calling sick because you just don't want to work. No, she's calling sick because she's truly in pain and no one is listening to her.